after Mom stabbed Aunt Helen and was sent to prison. Aunt Helen, who used to wrestle with Dad on the bed every afternoon at 3 o'clock, became our new mother. Everyone praised her for being so kind and said she treated the children of the ex-wife well. She was practically one of the world's top 10 most touching stepmothers. I believed her too. So when she told me that if I flew out the window I would go to heaven to see Mom, I held the newborn brother she had just given birth to and we went up to heaven together. I remember it was a weekend morning. Aunt Helen's mouth has recently lost its sense of taste, so I went out early to buy her some pickled cabbage buns. As I was getting ready to leave, my little brother woke up in his cradle. The baby babbled and cooed. He might be a bit noisy for people trying to sleep. I moved him into my room. It was around 7 o'clock. The breakfast shop is right by the east gate of the compound. That row is all morning noodle and pastry places. Usually there aren't many people there on weekends. But that morning, the line of people had nearly spilled out to the gated community's entrance. By the time it was my turn, the steamed buns weren't ready yet, so I ended up waiting another half hour. A weekend morning, and the breakfast shop has this many people? Of the 2 policemen, the younger one, Officer Ryan, now frowned slightly and looked at me. I thought for a moment and went on. My dad said the abandoned mall next to the complex has started construction again, so there have been a lot of people around lately. Dad also reminded me that when I came home from school, I shouldn't loiter by the mall. Go on. The other officer looked to be around 40, his skin dark. Officer Ryan addressed him as Chief Victor. After listening to me, he nodded and signaled me to continue. I kept recalling that nightmarish morning. I had bought the buns and when I got home, I took several deep breaths. I saw Aunt Helen trying to strangle my brother. You bitch, you lie. Helen rushed into the ward. She was still in confinement, a scarf wrapped around her head protecting her forehead, wearing a loose postpartum gown. After losing her son, she may have forgotten to use the breast pump. A large patch on her chest was already damp. She lunged at me with claws bared, luckily held back by nurses and a policeman. Helen, you've lost your son, do you still want to kill this daughter? That sentence stunned Helen for a moment. My father immediately dragged her out of the ward. I was enfolded in a warm embrace. The one speaking was Aunt Clara from next door, who also served as the head nurse at this hospital. The day my brother and I jumped from the building, she happened to be returning from the market. My brother landed right at her feet. Aunt Clara wrapped me tightly in a blanket, her heart aching. Helen is a good woman, a good stepmother too. If it weren't for what happened today, she wouldn't treat Mia like this. I remember, when she was with Mia's dad, everyone advised her against it. After all, Mia's mom had only gone to prison, and she was the one who willingly went to be a stepmother. Aunt Clara sat beside me and said this to the 2 policemen. A year ago my mother went to prison. She had severe depression and, driven to a breaking point, stabbed someone with a knife. The woman who was stabbed survived, but miscarried the child. My mother was sentenced to 3 years, but shortly after she arrived she was found to have killed herself in prison with a toothbrush. Aunt Helen is very kind. She works with Dad at the hospital. Although her health isn't good, she still often comes to our house to take care of me and Dad. So in the first month after Mom died, Dad smoothly married Aunt Helen. Mia, your father marrying Helen is really a blessing from the ancestors. From now on no one will beat our Mia anymore. This was what Aunt Clara next door said to me on the day Aunt Helen married Dad. Indeed, after Mom died, no one would beat me for no reason anymore. Watching Dad and Aunt Helen so sweet together, I couldn't help but nod slightly. Aunt Clara's story was nearly finished. It was nothing more than how Aunt Helen was so good to me. Every day she prepared the freshest soy milk for me, the beans freshly ground. I was bad at math, so Aunt Helen would stay up every night with me, teaching me math. She cared for me more than she cared for my father. A stepmother as good as that, it's not an exaggeration to say she'd move the world's top 10 stepmothers. I nodded beside them. Yes, Aunt Helen is the best mother. After my emotions settled, Officer Victor took out a notebook and jotted down a few things, then looked up at me. Continue. I took a sip of warm water and continued recalling that dreadful morning. I rushed at her then and hugged Aunt Helen from behind. What time? What? Officer Victor's sharp gaze. What time did you get home then? 8:30. Officer Victor lowered his head and wrote a few more lines in his notebook, then told me to continue. I pulled my little brother away. I don't know how he fell. I curled into myself, my hands clawing at my hair as countless fragments played back before my eyes. Helen's terrible face, my brother babbling and laughing. And finally, the sound of him hitting the ground. A thud that exploded in my mind. Dad said Aunt Helen was in a bad way after giving birth to my brother, that she had postpartum depression. I was always very careful not to let my brother upset her. If I'd known, I wouldn't have gone to buy buns. If only I'd come home earlier. Tears ran down her cheeks and over the corners of her mouth, the salt and bitterness spreading across her tongue. Her chest felt as if stuffed with a wad of cotton. It hurt so much she could hardly breathe. It's my fault Leo died. He was still so small, he used to grab my finger and laugh, all giggles. Tears seeped through her fingers. The teacher said policemen catch bad people, so that means I'm a bad person, doesn't it? Aunt Clara held me to her chest, heartbroken. Young Officer Ryan looked reluctant, his voice wavered. Sheriff Victor, she's just a child. Sheriff Victor remained calm. Mia, what time did you say you left the house? I was stunned for a moment as times flashed through my mind. 7 o'clock. What did you do before you left? Leo woke up, so I moved him and the cradle into my room. How long did you wait in line? Half an hour. What time did you get home? 8:30. Your sense of time is remarkably precise. People's memories can be fallible. I shouldn't have been able to remember so exactly. After all, I was only 9 years old. Officer Victor's gaze was like a hawk spotting a rabbit, sharp and keen. His eyes fell on my empty wrist. You don't have any electronic devices to tell the time. I looked at Officer Victor intently. Aunt Helen used to say time is as precious as gold. She practiced what she called the minute education method on me. I can precisely control how long I spend on each thing every day, so I'm quite sensitive about time. Minute education? I nodded, recalling, yes. Like eating, I can finish in 10 minutes, showering takes 8 minutes, using the bathroom takes 3 minutes. After Victor and the others left, I stayed in the hospital for 3 more days. My left hand was still wrapped in gauze, my younger brother had fallen from my left crook of the arm. Luckily the bone wasn't damaged. The day I was discharged happened to be my younger brother's funeral. The 3 of us in the family wore plain white clothes. Aunt Helen knelt on the ground, crying until her throat could hardly make a sound. I wanted so badly to comfort her, but the moment she saw me she looked as if she wanted to strangle me. I had to curl up to the side and silently watch the people coming and going. What a lively turnout today. They were all uncles and aunts I had seen before, at Dad and Aunt Helen's wedding. And at every time Dad and Mom threatened divorce. It seemed to be the same group of people. Helen, you need to try to let go. Leo's death was an accident, but Mia always treated you like her own mother, you can't pin Leo's death on her. The one trying to soothe Aunt Helen was Aunt Clara. She worked at the same hospital as Aunt Helen, and because they were neighbors they got along fairly well. Aunt Helen just stood there, staring as she burned Joss paper, muttering to herself, my Leo, he would smile, he just learned to roll over a couple of days ago. At that she broke down and fainted again. Father had no choice but to help Aunt Helen to the back to rest. In the vast morning hall, suddenly I was the only one dressed in plain clothes. Amid so many people in black, I looked particularly out of place. What a pity. She'd had a miscarriage before and was badly hurt, getting pregnant this time wasn't easy, and I hear bringing a child into the world now is like cursing the eldest. Doesn't she have a daughter? I see her always muttering about her daughter at the hospital, like she's her own. That one was left behind earlier, not her biological child. What good is she no matter how kind? I heard people say that the woman's child died, and it might have something to do with this daughter. My hearing had always been keen. Gossip rose and swelled in my ears like amplified sound, circling me repeatedly. I crouched where Helen had just been kneeling. The Jaws paper ingots in my hand I tossed into the brazier one after another. I felt a burning gaze at my back the whole time. When I turned, Helen was standing behind the curtain, leaning on the wall, staring at me coldly. That look lasted until late into the night. Helen pushed open my door. "It's you killed Leo on purpose." Helen's hands were clamped tight around my throat. I flailed with both hands, trying to shove her away. It didn't work. I had no strength. Just as my consciousness blurred, the pressure around my neck suddenly eased. My father had arrived in time and pulled Aunt Helen off me. Because the family housing was assigned by the hospital, a commotion this late filled the already small living room with people, making it feel even more cramped. "Helen, I know you're hurting, but this was an accident. You care about Mia so much, how could she hurt Leo?" "Helen, you know Dr. Wilson in psychiatry, right? You've been feeling down lately. I'll go with you to see him tomorrow." They tried to comfort her with a few words. But Helen kept staring at me. Her eyes were bloodshot. She knew my motive for doing this was significant. During class, the police came and took me away to question me again. It turned out Helen had gone to the station early that morning to turn herself in. She confessed to all the atrocities she'd committed against me over the year since she married my father. The so-called freshly ground soy milk was just an excuse to train my endurance. She made me get up at dawn and grind soybeans myself with a stone mill, and if I couldn't push it, I had to go hungry that day. The so-called math lessons were her mixing tens of thousands of yellow, green, and red beans together and forcing me to sort them through the night. Then there was her minute-by-minute bathing discipline. If I stayed in the shower beyond the allotted time, she would cut off the hot water. And things like that. Helen had always been a very clever woman. She never beat me. In my father's eyes, the neighbors, the hospital colleagues, she was a good stepmother. She cared deeply about her reputation. But this time she was willing to tear off the carefully cultivated good name just to pound home one point: she was not a good stepmother. And I had a motive to kill. I sat nervously in the interrogation room as a harsh light beat down from above. In the cramped space, Chief Victor and Officer Ryan sat opposite me. Officer Ryan brought me a cup of hot water. Maybe because he had just learned about Helen's abuse, there was a touch of sympathy in his eyes and his voice softened. "Don't be afraid. It's because your stepmother made a scene that we asked you to come in. The uncles will ask you a few questions in a bit, just tell the truth." I hugged the cup, took a small sip, and nodded obediently. "Helen said you've never gone to buy breakfast before, so why did you go that time? And besides, your relationship with her is so bad." The hem of my shirt was twisted in my palm over and over. "I don't have a mother anymore." My nose stung and my eyes went red in an instant. I looked at Chief Victor and fought to hold back my tears. "They said that if Aunt Helen has a little brother, Dad will throw me away. I already don't have a mother, I can't be without a father too." I lifted my head to meet Chief Victor's gaze. I thought if I behaved better and Aunt Helen liked me, she wouldn't let Dad drive me away. "All right, next question." Sheriff Victor had just started when the interrogation room door was suddenly flung open. "Enough." A beam of light stabbed inside. Dad stood in the doorway, his face half in shadow. "Enough, don't ask any more." Cloudy tears ran down his face as he looked at me with nothing but pain. "Mia, it's my fault, Daddy will take you home." Dad took my hand and bowed deeply to Sheriff Victor. "Sheriff Victor, I believe this was an accident. Whether it's my wife or Mia, I trust them." Dad led me out of the interrogation room. "Mia, sit here and wait for Daddy for a moment, I'll go sign something." I nodded obediently. While waiting outside, 2 policemen walked past me. I heard they found surveillance footage in the house where the child died. They've sent it to the forensics unit to be restored. Surveillance? I knew about some. When Mom was at her worst, she installed a lot of miniature cameras around the house, specifically to watch Dad. As soon as the footage is available, we'll know exactly what happened that morning. After saying that, they left. I swung my legs and stared blankly at the glass room across from me. I couldn't see inside. The science teacher once mentioned that this was one-way glass. It's the most convenient for surveillance. In the room, Chief Victor watched Mia sitting on the other side. Not long ago, they had finally found a camera that hadn't been dismantled. But unfortunately, it had no power and had stopped working long ago. They had intended to say things deliberately in front of Mia, hoping she would show the slightest crack. After all, she was 9 years old. Any tiny change, and he could have caught her. But she was too ordinary. Helen grabbed Chief Victor's sleeve, hysterical, paying no heed to the fact they were in a police station. Go arrest her, didn't you say she was suspicious? She's the one who killed my son, she did. It's not like you can just mention the surveillance in front of her and she'd give herself away. Chief Victor stared at Mia through the glass. Normally, once someone is sure they're safe, it's hard to hide when they hear something incriminating. If she's faking. Chief Victor murmured. Is she still a child, then? When we left the station, a light rain had started. By the time we reached the building, the ground still showed a smear of crimson. Helen practically ran up the stairs as if fleeing. I had just stepped through the door when she hurled the thermos at me. I couldn't dodge in time, shards from the bottle's inner liner sliced across my arm, and seconds later, blood welled from the torn skin. What are you doing? Dad asked, glanced at my arm, then dragged Helen aside. What am I doing? My son is dead, what else would I be doing? Helen's eyes were wild. When she looked at me it was as if she wanted to tear me limb from limb, strip my bones and skin. Dad stood between Helen and me. All right, Mia, you go into your room first. My father pushed me into the room. The old house wasn't well soundproofed, and the sound of their argument came through to my ears clearly. She was the one who killed Leo, why don't you arrest her? My father looked at Helen in silence. After a long while, he spoke calmly, Helen, tomorrow I'll go with you to see Dr. Wilson in psychiatry. Helen took a few steps back in disbelief and screamed, You think I'm the one with problems? You believe that dead girl's words? You think I wanted to strangle Leo? Finally, her voice breaking, she said, David, believe me, it really was her. I saw it. I saw Mia holding Leo as she jumped. Leo is just over 2 months old, and he already giggles at me and holds my hand. He's so smart, he's even learned to roll over. Every night, I dream about that day. If I don't catch the killer who murdered Leo, I'll never move on for the rest of my life. She couldn't have done that. My father's voice was laced with exhaustion. If it weren't for the clothesline downstairs, Mia would have died too. After a few moments of silence, Helen suddenly calmed. It's because of that thing. That night, she must have seen it, David, she saw that thing. My father shouted, She's only 9 now, what could she do? She's already 7, how could she not remember? They spoke almost at the same time. Their voices braided and overlapped until they read fear in each other's eyes. Sounds outside the room came and went. The incandescent bulb overhead flickered, the room was a dull, drowsy white. My brother's cradle was still in my room. The day he was born, I watched him sleeping beside Helen, red-faced, wrinkled, all bunched together. He would smile at me. He would also grip my finger with his own tiny hand. He was my little brother. He should have been the person closest to me besides Dad. I hugged the pillow, and tears still fell onto it. I crept toward the bedroom door on tiptoe, listening closely to the faint sounds coming from outside. Mia is only a 9-year-old child, she can't be expected to think of so much. Helen, I know you're devastated without Leo, but it was just an accident. Dad was still trying to reason with Helen. A few minutes later, Helen's voice was hoarse. I know. David, I only want to ask one answer. Once it's made clear, I won't make a fuss anymore. I heard footsteps drawing nearer. I immediately turned off the light and lay down on the bed. Creak. The sound of the door opening. A beam of light streamed in, and Helen's silhouette was cast on the wall. I know you're not asleep. Helen sat on the edge of the bed. Mia, Aunt Helen wants to ask you something. I crawled out from under the covers. Since Leo died, this was the first time Helen and I were speaking face to face without anger. That night, you saw it, didn't you? I tilted my head at her, trying to grasp what she meant, but in the end I only shook my head in bewilderment. That night your mother was arrested. What happened? You know it all, don't you? 2 years ago that night, Mom was taken away for intentional injury. She had stabbed a pregnant woman's belly with a surgical knife. The woman immediately lost her baby, and the woman's partner gave testimony that was extremely damaging to Mom. She was carted off to prison. The story has come this far. This is a tale in which my mother gets what she deserves. But what if we add identities to it? The pregnant woman is Helen, the pregnant woman's lover is David, who is my father and my mother's husband. Yes, this is the kind of tawdry affair you see on the street. The kind where a close friend steals another's husband. The emotional entanglement between the three of them is impossible to untangle or explain. I looked at Helen and said, I know Mom made you get rid of your baby. Mom went to prison. So you're going to kill Leo. You want revenge on me, right? At the mention of Leo, Helen began to breathe rapidly, her chest heaved, and the hard-won calm surged back into violence. You killed Leo, didn't you? I looked at her and said softly, Aunt Helen, you shouldn't make me grind beans at night. My hands are so sore. I watched Helen's pupils dilate in an instant. She lunged at me. After all, Helen was an adult, and still a mother lion who had just been separated from her cubs. All her grief and anger focused on me, concentrated in the hands that clamped my neck. I struggled desperately, my legs kicking at her knees. Helen's leg buckled. I broke free, but could only scramble toward the window to get away. Just as she lunged at me again, pinning me against the windowsill and trying with all her might to strangle me, the bedroom door was kicked open. Sheriff Victor barreled in with his gun raised. Helen, put your hands up. But Helen ignored him. I could only feel the pressure around my neck tightening. I couldn't breathe. Bang. Helen's leg was hit by a bullet. The searing pain made her unsteady. She staggered, and I wanted to grab her. But my arms were sore, I had no strength, just like the day I couldn't hold my little brother. And so, Helen fell from the window. The spot was exactly where her son had fallen. My room was the only one without security bars. 2 people in the house had died in succession. The atmosphere had frozen. At Helen's funeral, the same crowd came and went. They began with sighs and moved on to saying our household had bad feng shui. Some even brought up that incident from years ago. I told you so, there's no way so many good things would happen to that David, a promotion, a dead wife, and then a new bride. It's wicked, his wife just passed and he's already finding someone new. No decency at all. I heard Helen has been seeing him for a long time. Their voices reached Dad, and after the funeral he looked decades older. In the dim living room he sank into the sofa. Mia. Before I went into the room, Dad suddenly called after me. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring straight at him. Did Aunt Helen really fall because she was careless? I watched his eyes. The light in the living room fell on us, one on the left and one on the right, and the lamp stretched my silhouette long. Dad, I don't have a mother anymore. After that night, my father and I maintained a strange tacit understanding. When he came home, I was studying, at the library, or locked in my room. When I appeared at the dinner table, he would be down at the small restaurant on the corner grabbing a quick meal and wouldn't come home. 9 years passed, spanning middle school through the college entrance exam. Between my father and me, apart from pocket money, there was nothing left to say. Tomorrow's the Gaokao, don't feel pressured. Because we had 3 days off before the exam, I spent more time at home and we inevitably ran into each other. At dinner that night, my father, breaking his habit, suddenly started asking about my studies. But between us, the usual small talk and warmth of a father and daughter were long gone. All that remained was a stiff, awkward question-and-answer exchange. Dad drank by himself. Maybe because of his age, after a few glasses his cheeks flushed. "Mia, you're my only daughter. Tell me the truth, is it really you?" A hot tear rolled down from his eye. "Dad, my college entrance exam is in a couple of days. You haven't cared about my studies before, are you going to destroy the effort I've put in for the past 3 years?" When I stood up to go back to my room, he flipped the table over. Drinks and food spilled everywhere, bowls and plates hit the floor, shards scattering. It was like years ago, the hot water flask Helen had thrown. Dad stared at the broken pieces on the floor, his pupils slowly refocusing. When he looked back at me, a flicker of fear had appeared in his eyes. And disgust. "Did you really see everything that night?" "Dad, I don't understand." He suddenly laughed crazily, grabbing my arm and shaking it hard. I felt as if the whole world was spinning and I would faint. "Did you see it? Just like Helen said, you've been taking revenge all along, haven't you? You're avenging your mother, aren't you?" I shoved him away with force. Luckily he'd had a few too many drinks tonight. He couldn't keep his balance and fell straight to the floor. I looked coldly at the man on the ground. He had once been my mother's husband, my father. "Dad, a few years ago I was still a child." Before going into the room, I turned to look at him. "I haven't had a mother for a long time. Dad, after I finish my last English exam, let's go visit Mom. I'll be out of the exam hall at 4:30. A low sob came from behind me. By the time I closed the bedroom door, the sobbing had turned into a wail. Let him cry. He deserves to. Let him cry this one for my mother. The first few sections of the Gaokao went unusually smoothly. On the day of the final English exam, the community happened to be holding a homeowners meeting, and both our neighbors on either side were out. Before I left, Dad was still asleep at home. He had stayed up all night the day before performing several surgeries, so I explained the situation to the building management for him. At 4:50 p.m., when I finished my English exam and returned to the complex, I only saw groups of people gathered under the building. The fire hadn't been put out, thick smoke billowed from the window of the apartment that was on fire. The place on fire was my home. I went mad trying to rush into the building, but the neighbors held me back. My dad is still inside. He's been in a bad way lately. He finally took his medication and fell asleep at home. He's still there." I screamed until my voice broke, tears mixing with snot as they streamed down my face. The aunt downstairs wrapped her arms around me tightly, and Aunt Clara from next door kept trying to soothe me. "Mia, you have to trust the firefighters, they'll definitely get your father out." After a dozen minutes the fire was brought under control. Only my father was carried out. I pushed past everyone and lunged at him. His body had been burned to charcoal. I was drowned in grief. "Dad, you promised you'd go with me to sweep Mom's grave today." "Dad, I've already lost Mom, I can't lose you too." Several times I nearly fainted from sobbing. The people around us began to whisper. How can all the bad luck fall on that family? A few years ago it was like the child and her mother died, and now her father. Could it be that she's some kind of evil that kills her whole family? Go on, what nonsense. Fires happen, it's not a sign of anything. Yes, Mia is a good child. I remember I once reminded her to take down the clothes rack outside the wall. Later the government came to inspect illegal structures. Luckily I had already removed mine, so I didn't get fined. I have had good hearing since I was a child. Aunt Wang's words from downstairs reached my ears. When I looked up at her, an uninvited guest also appeared in the crowd. It was Sheriff Victor. From where he was standing, it was clear he had also heard what Aunt Wang said. With the help of the uncles and aunts in the neighborhood, I managed to handle my father's funeral smoothly. Fortunately, my father had bought insurance while he was alive, and that money was enough to let me finish college without worry. I didn't expect that after 9 years Sheriff Victor would find me again. This time we were still sitting face to face. Only the place wasn't the interrogation room, it was a small restaurant beneath my apartment building. I heard Sheriff Victor had since been promoted to deputy chief, but I still habitually called him Sheriff Victor. Long time no see, Mia. I heard you got into Fuda, not bad. I nodded. Yes, it went well. A silence. After a moment, Sheriff Victor said in a low voice, I've looked into what happened back then and learned the cause of your mother's death. She was bullied in prison, couldn't bear the tremendous pressure on her body and mind, and ended her life with a toothbrush. Mia, your mother's death is no one's business but her own. I stirred the ice in my cup with a straw. About Mom, I knew everything, or rather, I knew a little more than anyone else. Before Sheriff Victor could speak again, I looked up and asked him, do you know there's a kind of drug that can control a person's emotions? Before Mom was locked up in prison, she spent some time in a detention center. I begged the neighbor aunt to accompany me to see her. I thought she would explode in rage, would, as before, grab whatever was at hand and hurl it at me. But this time my mother was calm, and I even saw a gentle side of her. She took my hand and said she was sorry, said she would behave herself in prison, try to earn a reduced sentence and get out sooner, so that we mother and daughter could live together properly. I believed her. Just as a child is born to love her mother. But my mother broke her promise. Not long after she went to prison, she killed herself there. Dad told me that Mom had a depressive episode, that she couldn't bear the pressure and left. But my mother wasn't sick at all. 11 years ago that night. When Mom rushed back from the hospital to catch them, I was hiding in the wardrobe. It was Mom's birthday that day. I had planned to hide the present in Mom's room to surprise her. Instead I saw Dad bring Helen home. What use is giving her this medicine? Isn't it just to suppress emotions, to keep temper in check? Dad held Helen in his arms, a small medicine bottle from Mom's bedside cabinet raised in his hand. It was the medicine Mom took every day, I'd heard, to control her emotions. If she hadn't gone mad, could you have taken her place and gotten promoted? Helen looked wronged. I'm not trying to rush you, I just feel for our child. I don't want the baby to be born without a father. My father's mouth quirked. His eyes, fixed on the medicine bottle, were full of ferocity. Don't worry, people with depression can decide to end it all at any time. When my mother came home, she found them tearing at each other on the bed. In her hand she held the surgical knife she'd brought back from the hospital. Without hesitation, she drove it straight into Helen's belly. That night, Mom was taken to the police station, Helen to the emergency room, and Dad hired the best lawyer he could find, all to nail down the charge that Mom had intentionally hurt someone. Later, Mom died in prison. I only found out a year after. The child in Helen's womb wasn't Dad's at all, and that night she had deliberately lured Mom back home. And Mom's suicide. I've said it before, a child loves her mother by nature. So does a mother. A woman had held her child up as a threat to her. She had no other way out. My story is finished. I took a sip of the drink in front of me, the ice had melted and a cold sharpness exploded in my mouth. Sheriff Victor frowned for almost the entire time. You were only 9 then. He still doubted the truth of the whole story. It didn't matter. In any case, the damned were all dead. Sheriff Victor, I haven't had a mother for a long time. Only when a mother is present can a child be a child. I stood up to say goodbye to him. Sheriff Victor, I have other matters to attend to, I'll be going now. Wait. He called after me, hesitating before finally speaking, but that's your father. I smiled at him. Inside the glass room at the station, he's no longer my father. How did you know the timing so precisely? I thought for a moment and smiled knowingly. This time I didn't calculate the timing, he must have suddenly wanted to be a good father. So he set an alarm. After taking the sleeping pills that had been tampered with, he slept very deeply. So he couldn't smell the strong gas. The time was 16:30. He died at the only moment in this life when he wanted to be a good father. In a way, it was a mercy to him. Before I went to university, I went to see my mother. Every year I bring her a bouquet of her favorite tulips. But this year, I only brought yellow chrysanthemums. Mom, they're all gone. Now you can rest. A breeze rose, stirring the scent of flowers. What Helen hadn't expected was that the bottle of medicine she and my father had used to harm Mom years ago had been secretly hidden by me. Helen's madness was real. What a pity the police couldn't find the surveillance evidence I had deliberately manufactured for them. If they had, Helen would have been in prison long ago. So, upon hearing news that was overwhelmingly in my favor, and realizing that the evidence had been left by my own hand, how could I possibly feel fear?